Commander Selvek stood at the bridge of the Galactic Alliance patrol ship, Verlin, staring at the large holographic screen where the strange object floated in deep space. The patrols had been uneventful for months, the usual boring rounds around uninhabited systems, but today felt different. The object was enormous, silent, and moved with an unnatural calm through the restricted sector. No alarms had gone off when it entered. No beacons or distress signals had been triggered. It was as if it had simply appeared there, hidden by the darkness of space. Selvek ordered a long-range scan immediately, but the results made no sense. The ship's surface reflected only fragments of the scanner's beam, absorbing most of it like a dead thing. The ship had no clear energy signature, no identification codes, and no signs of communications. It drifted steadily, unbothered by the small patrol craft now carefully tailing it. Selvek narrowed his eyes, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. Space was vast and full of strange things, but even the oldest vessels left traces behind emissions, radiation, heat. This object had none. His crew exchanged worried glances, whispering under their breath, and Selvek knew they were thinking the same thing he was. This ship did not belong to any known civilization. Ignoring the silent warnings in his mind, Selvek decided to bring the Verlin closer. The unknown vessel was simply too important to ignore. If it was a lost artifact, it could make his career. If it was a threat, the Alliance needed to know. Slowly, they closed the distance, the glowing engines of their small ship pushing against the cold emptiness. As they approached, the true scale of the thing became clear. It was colossal, far larger than anything the Alliance had ever built. A mountain of black and silver metal fused together in a design that made no sense to the eye. No straight lines, no clear sections, only an endless maze of structures that twisted and layered upon each other like the tangled roots of a dying forest. The crew sat in silence, watching the thing grow larger on the screen, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing moment. Even seasoned officers, veterans of wars and frontier skirmishes, found themselves unable to look away from the ghostly beauty of the ship. It was not just big, it was wrong in some deep, instinctive way, like something that should not exist yet somehow did. When they finally came within close scanning range, Selvek gave the order to start a deep scan. Technicians rushed to obey, fingers flying across consoles, faces pale in the flickering light of the monitors. The first results came back almost immediately, and they were even stranger than before. The hull material was unknown, composed of dense layers that defied basic analysis. It was stronger than any known alloy, yet flexible in ways that should not have been possible. Worse still, small traces of organic matter were detected in the hull itself, as if the ship were alive. Selvek leaned forward, his heart pounding. This was no derelict or lost freighter. This was something different, something terrifying. They pushed deeper with the scans, searching for signs of a crew, a reactor, anything that made logical sense. Yet the deeper they looked, the less they understood. There were energy sources inside the ship, but they were oddly muted, buried beneath layers of strange material. There were structures that resembled weapon mounts, but their purpose and design were alien beyond comprehension. Every scan brought more questions, never answers. Suddenly, a low hum filled the bridge as the sensors picked up something unexpected. Movement, tiny shifts in the massive hull, like breathing. The crew froze, staring in horror at the screens. This ship was not dead. It was aware of them. Selvek struggled to remain calm, forcing his voice to stay steady as he ordered the ship to back away slowly. But part of him knew it was already too late. They had been seen. Perhaps they had been seen the moment they entered the sector. Perhaps the ship had allowed them to come close, had waited for them to grow comfortable before revealing the terrible truth of its existence. Selvek watched the scans with grim fascination, unable to tear his eyes away. The ship's surface rippled slightly under the scanner's touch, as if reacting to the probing beams. It was almost playful, almost mocking. A predator toying with its prey. The silence on the bridge grew heavy, each crew member trapped in their own fear. They knew they were looking at something beyond their experience, something born, not from science, but from nightmares. Selvek thought about sending a message to the Alliance command, but deep down he hesitated. What would he even say? That they had found a ghost ship built of unknown material, larger than anything recorded, showing signs of both life and death? That it was watching them with patience, waiting for something they could not understand? He knew no one would believe it until they saw it for themselves. And by then, it might be too late. Finally, Selvek made his decision. He ordered the communications officer to send a full transmission with all collected data back to the nearest Alliance outpost. They needed to know. Even if Yurlin did not survive this encounter, someone had to know what was coming. As the transmission beamed into the void, Selvek stood at the front of the bridge, staring out at the impossible ship floating like a shadow in the stars. His fists clenched tightly behind his back. No matter how strong their fleets were, no matter how advanced their technology had become, deep inside, he understood that they were not ready for this. The universe had always been a place of discovery, but today they had discovered something that perhaps should have stayed hidden. And as the Virulin drifted in the growing shadow of the human warship, Selvek felt the terrible weight of that discovery settle in his bones. The approach had begun, and with it, a storm that might tear the galaxy apart. The moment the transmission was sent, Selvek gave the final command to begin a full deep scan of the mysterious warship, knowing that what they were about to uncover could change everything they believed about space and survival. The technicians worked in tense silence, layering scans upon scans, pushing the ship's old systems far beyond their normal limits as they tried to break through the strange, suffocating silence of the alien vessel. Every pulse of energy sent toward the unknown ship seemed to vanish into its surface, absorbed without a trace, making their readings fuzzy and broken, as if the very structure of the ship refused to give up its secrets easily. At first, all they received were distorted reflections and jumbled data that made no sense. But as they refined their techniques, using experimental algorithms and overlapping scans, a faint image began to take shape, and what they saw drained the color from their faces. Beneath the black and silver surface was an inner frame that pulsed like the beating of a slow, monstrous heart, glowing faintly in a color that no one could name, something between violet and black, a color that made the eyes hurt if stared at too long, and wrapped around this pulsing core were layer upon layer of dense mechanical structures that looked more like bones than machinery, as if the ship itself had been grown instead of built. Selvek leaned closer, unable to believe the data. Appearing before him, feeling the weight of every second grow heavier in the pit of his chest, because this was not a ship made by sane minds following the laws of engineering or physics. This was something far older, something that obeyed rules no one in the galaxy understood. The scan penetrated deeper, cutting through the twisting layers, and revealed terrible things. Massive chambers filled with things that looked like weapons, but weapons made from materials so strange that even the best computers could not classify them, long halls that spiraled inward toward the core in impossible geometries that defied logic, and worst of all, dark shapes moving inside, slowly shifting with an unnatural grace, as if waiting for something to disturb their slumber. The temperature readings from inside the ship were cold beyond natural limits, suggesting the presence of environments hostile to known life. And yet there was movement, there was energy, there was intent. Every sensor on the Virulin started picking up low-frequency vibrations emanating from the warship, vibrations so deep and heavy that they bypassed their ears and went straight into their bones, making it impossible to ignore the growing feeling of wrongness, a silent scream buried beneath reality itself. Selvek ordered the scan to continue, despite the growing fear in the room, because he knew if they turned away now, they would lose their only chance to understand what they were dealing with. The closer they looked, the stranger the results became. Small, indecipherable patterns began to appear on the hull, symbols etched into the very metal, symbols that moved and changed shape when observed directly, as if the ship could feel their gaze and was responding in some primitive, dangerous way. The communication officer, pale and sweating, reported faint signals leaking from the ship, bursts of data that resembled ancient distress calls but twisted, warped, filled with layers of meaning that no translator could untangle, as if the ship were trying to speak to them, but only in a language born from nightmares. Suddenly, one of the technicians cried out in alarm as his console flashed red, the system detecting a surge of energy from the core of the ship, a slow, gathering force that felt heavy and terrible. Selvek demanded answers, but no one could explain what was happening, only that the ship's power was waking up, growing stronger, reacting to their scans like a beast irritated by a small, buzzing fly. The crew scrambled to shut down the scanners, but it was too late. On the main screen, they watched in stunned horror as the massive ship shifted in space, moving ever so slightly, its surface rippling like the skin of some ancient sea creature rising from the deep. No engines flared, no lights activated, and yet it moved with a will, turning its terrible presence toward the tiny patrol ship that had dared to disturb its rest. Selvek ordered full retreat immediately, but before they could even begin to pull away, the warship sent out a single pulse of energy, not a weapon, not a beam, but a wave of pure information that struck the Verlin like a hammer. Systems flickered and failed, lights dimmed, and for a brief, terrible moment, every member of the crew heard a whisper inside their minds, a voice not made of words, but of feelings, vast and cold and ancient beyond understanding. It was not a message of peace. It was not even anger. It was something worse: indifference, the casual awareness of a thing so far beyond them that their lives meant nothing, like dust brushed from a table. Selvek gritted his teeth and shouted over the chaos, demanding the engines restart, but the ship remained still, paralyzed in the dark. Around them, the warship continued its slow turn, and the sensors reported something even more terrifying. It was opening. A seam along the ship's underside, invisible until now, began to widen, revealing the glowing maw of an inner chamber, vast enough to swallow the Verlin whole without effort. The bridge filled with the sharp smell of fear as the crew realized what was happening. They were not escaping. They were being invited, or perhaps claimed. Selvek stared at the widening abyss before them, heart pounding so loud it hurt his ears, knowing deep inside that whatever waited inside that monstrous vessel was not a rescue, not an offer of diplomacy. It was something much older, something that saw them as little more than insects. Desperation gave him strength, and he barked orders to manually fire the ship's emergency thrusters, slamming the small craft sideways just as the pull from the warship's opening chamber began to grip them. Sparks flew from control panels, men and women cried out in terror. But somehow, the Verlin broke free, engines screaming in protest as they limped away from the yawning mouth of the ship. Behind them, the warship did not pursue. It simply watched, its monstrous presence lingering in the sensors, that pulsing core still throbbing like the heartbeat of a god. The scans had revealed much, but it had cost them dearly. Selvek knew they had barely scratched the surface of the thing's true nature, and already they had nearly been destroyed. As he stared into the darkness beyond the retreating ship, he realized with grim certainty that this was only the beginning. The human warship had awoken, and it had seen them. The Verlin barely held itself together as it drifted away from the monstrous human warship, its systems battered and its crew shaken to the core. But the true horror was not the damage or the fear, it was the terrible knowledge burning inside Selvek's mind as he pieced together the meaning behind everything they had seen and felt. Alone in the dim bridge, as engineers and medics scrambled to patch up both ship and crew, Selvek stared at the fragments of the scan results, his hands trembling slightly over the console, because hidden among the strange symbols and chaotic data were patterns that should not have been there. Patterns that matched something buried deep in the restricted archives of galactic history. The patterns were ancient warnings, forbidden signals that spoke of a time long before the rise of the known empires, a time when the galaxy was ruled by forces so destructive that the mere memory of them was enough to terrify civilizations into silence. Legends spoke of ships like gods, beings wrapped in steel and fire, who tore stars apart and left worlds burning in their wake, and Selvek realized with growing horror that the human warship did not resemble those ancient monsters by accident. It was one of them, or worse. It had been built by the same lost knowledge that had once plunged the galaxy into darkness. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same chilling conclusion. Humanity, a species previously thought to be young, wild, and harmless, had somehow unearthed secrets that should have stayed buried, secrets powerful enough to create a weapon that was not just a machine, but something far more. terrible an entity designed for pure, unstoppable war. Selvig's mouth went dry as he recalled the way the warship had reacted to their scan, not with hostility, but with a cold, lazy indifference, as if it considered their patrol ship no more dangerous than a speck of dust. He remembered the crushing weight of that alien voice in his mind, the wordless sense of vast, ancient contempt, and he understood now that they were not dealing with a new enemy. They were facing the return of an old nightmare, one that had been waiting in silence for the right moment to awaken. The revelation spread quickly among the senior officers, each one reacting with disbelief that turned swiftly into panic, because they knew there was no defense against a force like this. Their weapons, their fleets, even their mightiest dreadnoughts were like wooden toys compared to the kind of power this ship represented. If humanity had more of these warships hidden away, if they had entire fleets, then no empire, no alliance, no council could stand against them. The balance of the galaxy had already shifted, and most species did not even know it yet. Selvig tried to think clearly, tried to find some way to warn the council without triggering full-scale panic, but every scenario he imagined ended the same way. Fear would spread, desperate governments would lash out, and the humans, with their terrible machines, would crush all resistance without even needing to try. What chilled him most was the question that no one dared ask out loud. How did the humans find such knowledge? The archives that spoke of the ancient war machines were hidden and forbidden for a reason, locked away by civilizations that had learned their lessons in blood and ruin. Humanity should never have been able to access such secrets, and yet they had, which meant either the ancient safeguards had failed, or worse, something had given humanity the knowledge on purpose. As Selvig stared at the final scan images, watching the warship's core pulse slowly in the deep void like a waiting heart, he realized another terrible truth. The ship was not entirely mechanical. Beneath the armor, beyond the weapons, there was something living fused into its design, something that was neither fully machine nor fully biological. It was a hybrid of cold technology and dark life, something that breathed and dreamed and hungered in ways no sane mind could comprehend. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was not just a warship. It was a weaponized life form, a predator crafted by hands that understood the deepest, most dangerous truths of existence. It did not obey commands in the way normal ships did. It thought for itself, and it had chosen not to destroy the Virulin. Yet, Selvig could not stop the shiver that ran down his spine as he understood that their survival had not been an accident. It had been allowed, perhaps even arranged, for reasons too vast and cruel to imagine. The humans were not just awakening these ancient horrors, they were mastering them, bending them to their will, and using them as tools of silent, overwhelming power. A cold certainty filled Selvig's heart as he watched the distant black shape of the warship vanish into the swirling dust of the starfield, moving with a grace that no mere vessel should possess. There would be no negotiations, no peace treaties, no careful balancing of power. Once the humans chose to act, the galaxy would fall before them like dry leaves in a storm. They had already crossed a line that no other species had dared approach, and in doing so, they had become something new, something the rest of the galaxy could not even begin to understand or stop. Selvig knew they had to report what they had seen, even if the truth destroyed everything they thought they knew, because to hide it would be a crime beyond imagining. But even as he prepared his report, he felt a deep, sinking certainty that it was already too late. The ancient silence had been broken. The old powers had stirred once more, and humanity, reckless and brilliant, had woken them from their endless sleep. As the Virulin limped home, its hull scarred and its crew forever changed, Selv could not shake the feeling that they had only glimpsed a tiny fragment of the coming storm. Somewhere out there, the human warship moved with slow, patient purpose, unseen by the rest of the galaxy, and it carried within it a future shaped not by treaties or dreams of peace, but by fire, steel, and the unbreakable will of a species that had dared to unlock the secrets of death itself. And somewhere, deep inside that living engine of war, something ancient and terrible smiled, knowing that its time had come again. The Virulin glided through the empty stretches of deep space, carrying with it a heavy burden that weighed on every soul aboard. For though their bodies had survived the encounter with the human warship, Their minds were filled with a knowledge too dark and dangerous to forget. Commander Selvek sat alone in the dim communications room, the blinking lights around him the only sign that the ship was still alive. But what he prepared now was no ordinary report. It was a warning, a desperate message meant for the highest councils of the galaxy, and every word he chose carried the weight of countless lives. He had erased all traces of the regular communications templates, deleted the automatic headers and titles, and in their place he built something simple, stripped of politics and diplomacy, something that could not be misunderstood, even by those who wished to deny the truth. The silent message he crafted was not sent through normal channels, because Selvak knew that if the wrong ears heard it first, they might destroy it out of fear or greed. So he embedded the message deep into the background noise of the ship's navigational pulses, hidden like a ghost among them. Random signals? Impossible to detect unless someone knew exactly where and how to look. The words of the message were few but terrible, burning themselves into the records like scars. Humanity has awakened. An ancient power. It is no longer bound by known technology or diplomacy. Prepare for the end of the old order. They are coming. Once the hidden signal was complete, Selvek transmitted it with the ship's standard updates, confident that the secret code embedded within would reach the trusted watchers hidden across the galaxy, those who had been tasked long ago with guarding against the return of forbidden forces. But even as he sent it, a deep part of him doubted whether any warning could truly change what was now coming. As the ship moved closer to the outer stations of the Kelthoran sector, where they hoped to find repairs and political shelter, strange anomalies began to appear in their sensors, tiny ripples in space, faint echoes that danced just outside the range of clear detection, as if the very fabric of reality had started to shudder under some unseen strain. The crew grew restless, feeling the tension without understanding its cause, and in whispered conversations they spoke of the warship they had seen, the black engine of war that had stared back at them without mercy or fear. Some believed that they had not escaped it at all, that it was still following them, hidden in the folds of space, observing their every move with cold patience. Selvek did not dismiss the idea, for deep down he felt it too, that they were no longer free, that they carried a mark invisible but undeniable, and somewhere, the ancient predator in human hands was watching. When they finally docked at a small outpost station, relief washed over them for a moment, but it quickly faded as they realized that the station's systems were behaving strangely. Communications were delayed by fractions of seconds. Doors opened and closed half a beat too late, and the station's AI gave strange, fragmented responses, as if it were distracted by something beyond its programming. Selvak ordered an immediate lockdown, allowing no one to leave the ship until they understood what was happening, and it was then that the second silent message arrived, not through the official channels, but through the corrupted background systems of the station itself. A single line of text flashing for less than a second across every screen and monitor before disappearing without a trace. We have seen you. There was no signature, no source, nothing to trace, but the meaning was clear. The humans, or whatever force they had unleashed, knew about the warning Selvek had sent. They knew about the Virulin's survival. The Virulin could no longer act as a single target. Instead, Selvek ordered that their records be copied and split among small, encrypted data couriers, individuals trusted to disappear into the countless sectors of the galaxy, carrying pieces of the terrible truth to those who need to know. If one fell, others might survive. If even one message reached the right leaders, perhaps something could be done to prepare. It was a desperate, fragile plan, but it was all they had. As the couriers left in stealth pods under the cover of routine station traffic, Selvek remained aboard the Virulin, knowing full well that he and his ship were now a marked prey. He ordered the crew to prepare for immediate departure, but as the engines hummed to life, another silent message appeared, this time only on Selvek's personal console, written in perfect, emotionless human language. You are not our enemy. Yet, Selvek stared at the words, his heart pounding, because beneath the flat message lay a terrible possibility. The humans were not simply awakening the ancient forces for random destruction, but for a purpose, a goal that they had not yet revealed. The galaxy was not just facing war, it was facing a transformation, a rewriting of everything it believed about power, survival, and control. Humanity had crossed a line that no other species had dared approach, and now they were shaping the future with weapons older and darker than history itself. Selvek knew then that the Council would never believe them until it was too late, that fear and arrogance would blind the great powers until the humans moved openly, and by then, resistance would be meaningless. As the Virulin left the station, slipping away into the deep void once again, Selvek stood on the bridge, watching the stars slide past, and he understood the full weight of their task. They were no longer just witnesses to a terrifying revelation. They were the first harbingers of a new age, one that would sweep away the old empires like sand before a tidal wave. Somewhere beyond the black curtain of stars, the human warship waited, patient and unstoppable, and behind it, an entire species that had embraced the forgotten truths of the universe and made them their own. The silent messages had been sent, the warnings given, but Selvek knew that true understanding would only come when it was far too late to act. The galaxy was changing, the darkness was rising, and humanity was already at its heart. Holding the ancient fire in their hands, the Virulin floated into the uncharted sectors of space. Leaving behind the crippled stations and broken alliances of the old galaxy, a new fear settled over every living soul aboard, deeper and more chilling than anything they had felt before. For it was no longer just about survival or escaping the wrath of a human warship, it was about living in a galaxy whose rules had changed forever, where power no longer belonged to the ancient councils or mighty fleets, but to a species that had awakened something older and stronger than anyone could imagine. Commander Selvek stood silently on the observation deck, staring into the endless night, knowing that beyond the distant stars, humanity was moving, growing, and preparing, not with the noise and chaos of other races, but with a terrifying calmness that spoke of complete control, and he realized that it was not their weapons that made them dangerous, but the cold certainty with which they used them. The galaxy had long taught that every empire would fall to time, that every war would end in treaties, and that every power could be matched by another if given enough effort. But now Selvek knew this was no longer true because the humans had found something that made them immune to fear, something that had erased hesitation from their hearts, and it was that certainty, that unstoppable will, that would crush any resistance like an insect beneath a mountain. Across the ship, officers and crew tried to maintain the routines of their lives, clinging to duty and schedules as if they could keep the terror at bay. But in every whisper, in every glance, the same truth trembled: the old galaxy was dead, and they were living in the first breaths of a new era, ruled by beings who had seen the face of ancient power and claimed it for themselves. Reports trickled in from the scattered couriers Selvek had sent, messages filled with horror and disbelief as more races encountered the changing face of humanity. Entire armadas disappearing without a trace, once impregnable fortresses reduced to dust without a single recorded battle, ancient treaties shredded as human emissaries walked alone into hostile capitals and demanded submission with nothing but their presence. No declarations of war, no grand speeches, no endless negotiations, only a quiet, unstoppable advance that left rulers trembling and soldiers fleeing. The old powers that once held the galaxy in their grip found themselves paralyzed, their fleets too slow, their weapons too weak, their politics too blind to understand that the rules had changed before they even knew a game had begun. Selvek received a final coded message from the last courier to survive, a simple transmission intercepted from a human vessel, but its content froze him to his core. The galaxy will be made whole. Resistance is irrelevant. There was no hatred in those words, no anger or cruelty, only a calm statement of fact. And Selvek understood that the humans were not seeking revenge, nor conquest in the old sense. They were reshaping existence itself, driven by a vision only they had seen and a power only they could wield. Fear spread like wildfire across the border sectors, ancient enemies joining hands in desperation, old grudges forgotten in the face of a threat. None of them could fight, but even united, their fleets moved too slow, their weapons too primitive, and their leaders too divided by old mistrust to mount any real defense. Everywhere, rumors grew of planets that surrendered without a shot fired, of human scientists rebuilding dead worlds in the space of a few days, of mysterious black ships appearing and vanishing like ghosts, leaving only silence behind. Selvek knew there would be no great battle to save the galaxy, No last stand that would go down in legend, because the humans did not fight battles the old way anymore. They moved like storms, like natural disasters, reshaping reality itself without needing to fire a single weapon most of the time. And that was the true source of the new fear, the realization that humanity had moved beyond the galaxy's understanding, and they were not coming to destroy, but to dominate by simply existing in a form no other species could match. On the Vuralin, Selvek gathered his remaining officers, those few who had seen the truth and survived long enough to accept it, and he spoke words that felt heavier than any he had ever said before. We are not fighting a war. We are surviving a transformation. Our task is no longer to resist but to endure, to remember the old ways, so that when the storm passes, someone will still know what was lost. As the ship moved deeper into the void, avoiding all known paths and living like a fugitive among forgotten stars, Selvek sent a final silent message into the deep black, a beacon not of war, but of memory, containing the history of the old galaxy, the dreams, the struggles, the failures, and triumphs of countless civilizations, because he knew that in the age that was coming, such memories might be the only treasures worth preserving. And though they traveled in silence and darkness, every crew member carried in their heart a seed of the old fear, not the fear of death or pain, but the fear of being forgotten, of becoming just another dust mote swept away by the coming human tide. For now, the humans were patient, building their strength, shaping their new order. But one day they would come for the last free places in the galaxy, and when that day came, even the hidden ships like the Vuralin would have to choose, to kneel, to vanish, or to be remade in the image of a power beyond understanding. Selvek closed his eyes as he felt the ship hum beneath his feet, carrying them farther into the unknown, and he made a silent vow that no matter what happened, no matter how dark the future became, he would not let the memory of what the galaxy had once been die in silence. He would carry it within him, a fragile flame against the endless night, and perhaps someday, someone would find that memory and remember that there had been a time before the new fear, a time when the galaxy had been wild and free and full of hope. But for now, they could only drift through the darkness, carrying their memories and their fear like a shadow across the stars, while somewhere beyond their sight,